All right? Excellent. Good to see you here. I was here actually last year as well. I was actually doing a session for Unit4 and for all of you. So thank you very much for actually inviting me again. I'm very pleased to be here with you. Okay, so we've heard Stefan talking a lot about change. So what I'm here to do today is to really tell you how essentially you can move from facing and essentially suffering that change that is happening in the market to essentially going with that change, evolving with that change, and potentially transforming, changing your organization so that you stay relevant to your customers as well. So my name is Daniel Zoe-Jiminez, as I mentioned earlier, as he actually mentioned earlier. Don't try to pronounce that at home. It might be difficult. You might have already noticed that my accent is from Spain, Barcelona. But I've been here in the region, in Asia Pacific, close to a decade already, essentially 6 years here in Singapore. So what I'm going to do today is to really share with you the research that I've been doing in this region. Okay, so I'm part of IDC. We are a leading market research and consultancy firm. So essentially, I'm very excited because I have a lot of really interesting stuff that I'm going to share with you. And you're going to be the first people in Singapore to actually see it. In fact, the first people to actually see it in the region. Okay, so I'm going to talk essentially about the imperative to change in the context, of course, of digital transformation. All those changes that we are seeing in the region and worldwide. And then I'm going to tell you essentially why you should change, or rather potentially transform, as a result of those changes. And then I'm going to tell you what are the priority areas that you should focus on. And finally, essentially, I will tell you how you should do it. Because I hear a lot of stuff in the market. A lot of companies will tell you essentially that there is change. But how do you actually react to that? How do you actually change? What is it that you need to do? So that's essentially what I'm going to say. Okay, so before I get into that, what I want to essentially, I want you to think about your customers. So when you think about your customers, does it take longer today to acquire new customers than it takes in the past? How about your churn rates? Are they increasing? How about your employees? So if you think about your employees, are their productivity rates stagnant or decreasing? Or maybe your employee turnover is also increasing. It might be your case, it might not be your case. But when you think about essentially your revenues, are they lower compared to those of last year? And are your competitors actually focused on essentially market expansion while you see yourself thinking about cost cutting? How about, when you think about your organization, how about, are you able to actually embrace a fail-failure mentality, a fail-fast mentality? Is that your case? Are you able to actually drive innovation forward? Well, you might be wondering what I'm asking you all that, but essentially the reason is because you might potentially today you might not actually see those as being problems that your company is facing. So if that's your case, actually, that's probably because you're a market leader. But today, what I'm going to try to do is that you can continue to stay relevant in the context of all these changes that we're seeing and these potential problems. But clearly, those are signs. If you're suffering any of these, those are signs that definitely your company needs to at least change or potentially transform. Why? So whenever I talk to any organizations, people like yourselves in the region, so what I tend to see is that we all agree at least in one thing. Changes have happened forever. We all know that. But what is happening today that we are not seeing or we haven't seen before is that those changes are happening today faster than ever before. We are seeing those changes happening constantly. So keeping up with that change is difficult. So at this point, probably you are wondering why do I have a frog just looking at you in the screen, right? I like to call that Crispin, by the way. It's my friend Crispin. So essentially, the reason why I do have that frog over there is because frogs are actually very adaptable animals. They really adjust to change and different things, like you people, like organizations. So if you think about that frog over there, that little amphibian, can potentially be in the freezing cold winter, can actually adjust to the really, really cold temperature by essentially stopping its heart beating. And it will actually survive for weeks just by essentially releasing an anti-freeze solution so that it can keep its body cells from actually completely freezing out. So it's amazing what this frog can do. But if we were to do the opposite experiment, if we put that frog on a pot and start heating up the water, and by the way, I'm not suggesting that you guys should do that, right? But just for the sake of the experimentation here, what I want you to think about is the fact that if we were to put that frog on a pot, and then we start heating up that water, what happens is that despite the frog's ability to actually make a jump off the pot, it doesn't do it. Why? Because essentially it can't keep up with that, it can adjust. It does adjust so that essentially it doesn't die. So if you start increasing that temperature a little bit more, it will continue to stay there. It won't actually jump. And it's not that it's not capable of actually jumping. It can do it, but it won't do it simply because it's thinking, okay, I can still adjust to that temperature. So what happens after that is that when the water actually reaches boiling point, right, the frog actually realizes, our friend Crispin actually realizes that, I need to desperately jump off the pot because otherwise I'm gonna die. But what happens is that the frog actually dies. You know why? Because it's not his ability to actually jump off, it's rather because he's been adjusting and adjusting and adjusting for so long that he has completely lost out all its energy to actually make that jump, right? So what killed the frog wasn't actually that ability to make a change. It was rather its inability to make that decision of changing at the right time. So why? Why essentially I'm sharing this story with you is because I see that happening everywhere. So you guys, and you've heard Stefan, we all realize that there is massive change, a massive shift in the market, right? So a lot of companies like yourselves, maybe that's not your case, I hope that is not, you see those changes happening and you're adjusting. You're adjusting your body temperature. You're trying to keep up with that change and just making a fine-tune, automating a process, whatever is your case, right? But there is a time where you really need to make that jump. And that decision of making that jump needs to be sooner rather than later. And today might be that time. You need to do it before it's too late so that you can stay relevant in the market. Now, what are we seeing in the market from an IDC perspective? What we are seeing is that by 2018, 33% of the top 20 organizations here in this region are going to essentially face that disruption, that they are going to be disrupted by new entrants, new competitors. Just think about all the change that is happening again. Think about companies like, in the financial services industry. If you are a bank today, right, your business, part of your business is really loans, for example. Then you suddenly have a startup company out of China, funded by Xiaomi, right, the mobile device manufacturer. And then that company is essentially creating a peer-to-peer lending platform that allows people like you and me to essentially, lend money to each other. Will you have expected as a bank that something like that will disrupt your industry? Of course not, right? So that is happening constantly, so you need to react to that. Now, transforming is, again, no longer an option. It's really what you need to do. And second, of course, your battleground, as you transform, as you change, is going to be the customer relationship. It's the relationship with your customers. That's the most important thing. And finally, data. Really, data is at the center of that transformation. Data is going to be critical moving forward, right? But also, the most important asset that you really need to focus on is people. People like you. Right? That's the most important asset, okay? Now, I want to share with you some of the predictions and how we are expecting the market to move forward, okay? So in that particular context, when we think about transformation, digital transformation, we think about leadership. That's the most important thing. So that's the thing that you really have to have in mind. I tend to, whenever I have a conversation with end users or technology buyers like yourselves, something that I tend to see is that maybe you will buy some technology, maybe you will try to change or streamline a process. How about a change in leadership? I'm not suggesting that you guys should, advocate for firing up all the management team. Not at all. What I'm trying to say is that leaders also need to change, right? Unless leaders do change or do something about it, nothing transforms, nothing changes in the organization. You know that sponsorship from the leaders is critical, right? So in that context, what we are expecting is that essentially by 2018, that's essentially in the next 2 years, 60% of the top APAC 1,000 organizations, and particularly CEOs, are going to put digital transformation at the center, at their heart of their core strategies. What does that mean? Well, it does mean that, by the way, what this prediction actually underscores is the fact that digital transformation is not a passing trend. It's not something that is just a new, something new that we are just inventing here or creating just for the sake of whatever, selling something in the market, right? So that's something that your CEOs as a company are going to actually focus on in the next couple of years. 60% of those are actually going to focus on that, right? So it's critical. When it comes to actually putting the customer at the center of your strategies, which as you can see is obviously critical, what happens is that we're expecting that essentially 80% of B2C organizations and 60% of B2B organizations are going to essentially completely overhaul their digital front door. Digital front door is the term that we use in IDC to talk about your, let's say, channels or customer touch points, if you like, okay? So your web, your call center, all of that is going to be overhauled in order to support as many as, sometimes 10,000 more customer interactions as you have today. So the reason why that prediction is extremely important is because it talks about scale. So we are reaching an area of scale today, okay? So it's not only about the customer interactions that you currently have today, it's about, increasing those customers' interactions exponentially. So in that particular context, of course, you need to have the right technology infrastructure. Otherwise, how are you going to support all that, right? You need to make changes. And now it comes perhaps my favorite prediction. It's a very interesting one that actually talks about how we as companies are evolving and where are we heading to, okay? So essentially it says that 65% of large enterprises are going to essentially become, or commit to become actually by 2018, information-based companies. Just think about that. What is it that you sell today? Most likely assets, services, products. What we are saying with that prediction, the statement is that you guys, your companies, are going to become, or are going to be trading not on assets, but on data, customer data. That's really where we are headed to. In the region, by the way. So 65% of large organizations in the next 2 years are going to focus or commit to actually focus on trading on data. That's a massive change. That's where we are headed to, okay? Next one, for those of you in the audience that are part of IT organizations, so essentially in the IT group, you will find this actually very interesting. So what we are saying is that by 2018, again, 35% of IT resources will actually be spent or actually used to support the creation of new digital revenue streams. That's a very important fact as well. And by the way, it's not that we decide in IDC to put together those predictions just by looking at this crystal ball. Of course, we talk to all of you, we talk to organizations in the region, and then we see what is happening based on what is happening in the market and what we see happening in other regions as well, right? And then finally, when it comes to work, what we are expecting is that by 2019, 10% of work is actually going to be sourced from skills-based marketplaces, right? So think about crowdsourcing. Think about Uber, but for every single industry. So you're going to source not only your talent, your work, 10% of that, from skills-based marketplaces. So that's extremely important. That's very interesting as well. I tend to find that prediction very interesting in the context of HR, right? And I know that many of you are from HR here. So think about that. You need to think about how you can actually manage, optimize, and find that right talent in the future. Most likely, some of that is going to come from external sources, what we call the elastic workforce. As opposed to your current one, the elastic workforce. Now, what are the top priorities in the region? What's the reason why you guys or organizations like you are actually spending or thinking about spending on digital transformation projects? The three more important drivers, and by the way, this is coming from a survey that we just did recently, so again, you are seeing this for the first time in the region. The three most important reasons why organizations are spending or looking at digital transformation today, it comes to essentially people, data, and if you like, customer interaction, so omni-channel experiences. So let's start from the bottom. So omni-channel, and these are the top three priorities. When it comes to omni-experience transformation or omni-experiences, what we are seeing is that a lot of companies are really looking at, how can I really deliver that experience to my customers? But not only to them, I need to align all my ecosystem in order to deliver those experiences to my customers, right? I need to think about my employees as well. Are they satisfied? Are they doing well in the organization? Because I tend to see a lot of discussion around how do I deliver that great customer experience to my customers? But how about the focus on your employee? Unless the employee is satisfied, unless the employee is actually happy in the organization, how are you expecting that employee to actually deliver a great customer experience? You need to focus on the employee as well, right? So in order to deliver that, you need to be mindful of the entire ecosystem. The second priority here is data. So as I mentioned earlier, data is a top priority, right? So organizations like yourself are looking at essentially becoming data-centric and customer-centric. That's the second most important factor that is driving digital transformation in the region, okay? Whenever you see the word, by the way, DX, DX is a term that we use in IDC to refer to digital transformation. Okay, that's essentially the acronym we use. And then finally, the most important factor, and of course we've heard before Stefan talking about it, and it's not that we align ourselves in order to discuss today, but according to our survey, the top most important reason why organizations like you, are actually transforming or looking at transformation is essentially productivity. You're looking at making the organization more productive, more efficient. So we'll talk about that later, okay? Now, how do you transform? What are the top priority areas? What are the most critical factors that you need to consider? Last year, if you're here, probably you saw me talking a little bit about this. So I'm not gonna actually give you all the details again, but I just wanna quickly touch on this. So again, as I mentioned earlier, leadership is the most important thing, or one of the most important things that you need to consider as you move forward, right? You need to think about having an outside-in business environment, right? As opposed to being inwards looking, thinking about your products, your strategy, all that needs to be done in the context of the ecosystem. It needs to be done in the context of our customers. Are our products really well-suited to actually serve our evolving customer needs? So essentially, you need to make the organization and the leaders capable of creating that vision and strategy for the use of digital technologies. The second priority is essentially omni-experience transformation. So omni-experience transformation, as I mentioned earlier, is taking an ecosystem-first approach as to how you deliver your products and services. And that is essentially in order to grow customer loyalty, which of course is the most important thing, right? You need to make your customers loyal so that they can become customer advocates as well, right? The third one is information transformation, which can be kind of like a little bit of a mouthful, right? Information transformation. But anyway, so the point here is that you need to focus on capturing the right data, using that data, where do you store that data, how do you use it, how do you analyze the right data set, how do you integrate those different data sets in order to make the right decisions. But more importantly, as I mentioned earlier, we are saying that 65% of organizations are going to become, by 2018, information-based companies. So what that means is that essentially it's not only about making the right decisions, it's about monetizing that data, right? So that's the focus as you move forward. And then operating model transformation, that essentially means that you need to make the organization more adaptable, more agile. It's all about agility in this era, right? So you need to really focus on that so that by connecting people, by connecting things, by connecting assets, that's critical here. And then finally, work. So you need to transform how we work today. I mean, look, there are 4 different generations at work today. 4, at least 4, right? Some organizations might have just 2, some 3. We see many organizations having today baby boomers, Generation X, Generation Y, and of course, millennials, right? Everyone talks about millennials. By the way, we just recently did a survey here in the region. You know what we found? That everyone is saying millennials are different. Millennials, they're going to change everything. Look, based on that survey, what we found is that when it comes to work, and especially when it comes to basic things that do matter from a work perspective, we are all the same. So when we were asking what is the priority that makes you actually switch from one job to the other, what is the main driver for you to switch? Guess what happened? Millennials, all generations, money. I was surprised. And look, I was surprised because I saw that it wasn't only, countries that you might potentially expect that will happen. It was everywhere in Asia. So yeah, name it. Singapore, Malaysia, Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, all those countries had that priority. Of course, when it comes to the second most important reason, it will be slightly different. So in more conservative or more mature economies, you will find different factors, like security, for example. Australia played, security was an important factor. In Singapore, it was all essentially, the top priority was money and rewards, by the way, so it's not only money, it's like being rewarded by your managers, but that was the most important factor, okay? Now, how do you do all this, right? How do you focus on those dimensions that I mentioned earlier? So we in IDC have put together a methodology, a framework, that can help you actually do that. So when it comes to digital transformation, you need to really prioritize. You need to think about, based on those areas that I mentioned earlier, where do I start? How do I look like in that journey of transformation, right? So if you actually look at the left, we actually plot 5 stages of maturity. The one on the left is what we call digital resistors. Those organizations that we place in that bucket are organizations that essentially don't look at digital technologies. They only look at digital technologies in order to actually counter threats. And by the way, when it comes to customers, they only focus, or they actually, rather, they provide only very weak customer experiences. So if you look at the next stage, digital explorers, those organizations over there, those are actually slightly more advanced, obviously. So those organizations actually provide digital customer experiences, but the problem is that they are not consistent. So when it comes to their products and services, essentially they are not well integrated and it is not consistent. So when you're interacting with those companies, you really don't have that consistency in how you feel when you are looking at different channels, right? So that's a problem. So when it actually becomes more interesting is when it comes to digital players. Those organizations over there, they are, that experience is actually more consistent. They are slightly more advanced than the previous stage. The only thing is that, when it comes to driving innovation, those organizations are still providing, I wouldn't say basic experiences, but essentially you will feel that you've seen that before. It's not that they are driving that necessary innovation that we are all demanding for, okay? Next stage, of course, digital transformers are the ones that we and everyone are talking about. So those companies over there are the leaders in the industry. Those companies are the leaders in every market category. So those companies are essentially not disrupting, but essentially making a huge leap actually in using digital technologies, okay? And then finally, disruptors. Of course, we all know who they are, right? So there is no need for me to continue to talk about those. Now, looking at how this actually looks like, right? Because of course that's kind of like the theory. Let's talk about what we see, right? So last year, actually, when I was here, I recall actually showing you a glance of those results for US and worldwide. So essentially, when it comes to actually see how organizations across the world are placed in that maturity journey, this is what we are seeing. Those are US companies. So hold your cameras, because that's actually US still, right? So what we are saying is that actually, the majority of organizations, essentially the large majority of organizations in US, are essentially, between stage 2 and stage 3. And this, by the way, was a survey that we did in US last year at this time. So of course, if you were to look at the same picture today, it will have obviously evolved. Because they are, those companies are not just staying there, they are evolving as well, right? But what I really, really want you to pay attention to is the region. Asia Pacific, excluding Japan, by the way. Because Japan is sorry for the expression, but Japan is a different animal altogether. So when it comes to research in IDC, we look at Asia Pacific, and then Japan is, we kind of like exclude it, right? It is different, it's slightly different. It needs to be treated separately. And of course, we look at Singapore in isolation too, so I can tell you exactly how Singapore scores there, but I'm gonna hold that. So what I wanna show you today is this is Asia Pacific. Let's take a second to actually reflect on that, okay? Let's look at that. You can see that close to half of organizations in the region, excluding Japan, are still at the first stage of maturity. So yes, we all talk about digital transformation. When it comes to actually doing it, it's difficult, very, very difficult. And of course, what we are assessing here is your capabilities in actually prioritizing, actually taking on board all those 5 dimensions that I showed you earlier, like leadership, work source, operating model, all of that. So we are scoring your capabilities in those dimensions, right? So again, as you can see, what this means is that essentially organizations in the region are essentially just starting that journey, right? The use of digital technologies for companies like yourselves is just starting. And the experiences that you provide to your customers are still quite weak, right? Of course, there are 33% of organizations which are already doing that, which is great to see. And I'm happy to tell you that, by the way, Singapore is the third, I would say perhaps the third most advanced country in the region. So of course, when it comes to actually the average results, Singapore will be, kind of like the majority of organizations, I'm sorry, not the majority, but kind of like close to a 42% are actually in stage 2. So, of course, in this chart, we are also plotting companies in Vietnam, in Philippines, in Malaysia, in Indonesia. So, of course, there is a lot of balance that you need to create when you score organizations in the region. But still, what that tells you is that there are a lot of gaps, right? And we need to fix them. And that's essentially what I'm going to focus on today. I'm going to tell you where you should focus on in the next, well, actually, not in the next few days, tomorrow, where you should start. So before I do that, I just want to share with you an example. A good example of someone, of a company actually delivering great customer experiences by essentially using digital technologies. A company in a massive transformation, massive shift. And by the way, sorry, it's not an example from the region, but I deliberately actually picked this because I thought that it was an example of a company that is smaller, so that you can all understand that digital transformation is not only about large organizations just making a big leap. It can be done by any organization. In fact, this is actually an example from my home country, Spain. I've been here in the region 6 years, but yeah, I'm from Spain, as I mentioned earlier. And this is an example of a company in the arts industry, right? So, an area where you wouldn't expect digital transformation to happen so fast. So the first 30 seconds are in Spanish with English subtitles, right? But then the rest is in English. So can you play the video, please?
A mediados del 2013, la industria del arte en España sufrió uno de los golpes más grandes de todos los tiempos.
El gobierno decidió cambiar el impuesto de los espectáculos teatrales del 8 al 21%, logrando la mayor sangría de espectadores que se recuerde.
Un 30% menos de espectadores en tan solo un año. La gente se volcó a consumir entretenimiento probado masivamente como los blockbusters americanos.
Ante esa realidad, la compañía independiente de comedia Teatraneo decidió tomárselo con humor e inventar algo.
Pay Per Laugh, the first comedy shows where you only pay for what you consume. We fitted each seat with a facial recognition system that detects the smile and proposed the following deal to spectators. Entrance will be totally free. If the show produces no laughs, you don't pay anything. However, if you laugh, you have to pay for each smile. Each smile produced is worth 30 euro cents, something that in this day and age is quite a reasonable price. At the end of the show, the spectator could check their laughter account before paying and even share it on social networks. And so that no one would cry for having laughed more than they could afford, the maximum amount to pay was 80 laughs for 24 euros. The average price of the ticket increased by 6 euros. The system was covered by the main national media outlets, and this produced 35% more spectators. Each Pay Per Laugh show produced 28,000 euros more ticket money than was normally taken. Currently, the system is being copied in other theatres in Spain. A mobile phone app was created as a system of payment, and the first season ticket was launched for the number of laughs, not shows. We should also not write off the...
All right, so I've counted at least 45 laughs. So you owe me $45, right? So I think that that's a great example again because it's a kind of like a small company, arts. So it's a theater. They were suffering a lot, and obviously just because of that, obviously they change, they transform, and you can see that that can happen in every industry. That's why I found it to be like a very interesting example. Now, I'm gonna get into the action right now because I think that I only have like 8 minutes. Right? So, well, not to say that the previous stuff wasn't about action, but what I'm going to tell you right now is what are the barriers, the roadblocks that I see organizations in the region, and by the way, not only here, but worldwide. What are the problems, the challenges that you guys are facing when you try to really move forward in that journey? Why 45% of organizations in this region are still in stage 1? Okay? These are your barriers. Now, let's take a look at these. Just forget about, actually, if you look at the last challenges, the last 3, it's not to say that your problems are related to not having the right vision, the right strategy, the right incentives, the right leadership. It's not to say that you don't have the right partners. When it comes to digital transformation, when it comes to you, your problems based on our surveys, are essentially due to culture, legacy systems, and people. So it's the traditional stuff. It's really, and by the way, it's not to say that it's easy to fix, right? We all know that people, culture, and systems are a problem everywhere we look at. How can you really make changes to those things so that you can make progress? So in the next 8 minutes, I'm going to focus on that. And then I will stop my presentation, I will conclude it. Okay, so first thing that we are going to address today, let's talk about people. So based on that survey, essentially you were saying that when it comes to digital transformation, the problem that you're facing is that you lack the right skill sets in the organization in order to transform, in order to make those changes that you need to make. So what I want you to think about is the fact that when it comes to that problem, it's all about talent management, right? You need to have the right talent in the organization, and of course, not only have it, but attract the right talent to the organization and keep it, which is critical as well. So what I want you to think about that is that essentially you need to rebalance your portfolio. What you have on your slide here is an example based on our survey, actually, looking at IT talent. But this exercise that I'm going to show you right now is something that you can do regardless, like you can do it in your HR department, in the organization overall, okay? So what I would like you to think about is, as you look at today, your current situation as a company, when you're looking at digital transformation, at transforming, making changes, I want you to think about what are the roles in the organization that are critical today. right? Think about it. As you think about those, I want you to plot a y-axis, right? As you think about those roles that are critical today, you put those roles that are important high in the y-axis. As you think about the roles that are not important today, you put them low in the y-axis. Now, the second thing that you need to do, once you have that, is think about the future. Think about the next 3 years. When you think about those 3 years and what is coming next, what you might need from a skill sets perspective, what are the roles that you might need, I want you to think about that x-axis, okay? And then plot those roles that are going to be critical in the next 3 years farther down the right. The ones that are not going to be critical, put them farther on the left, okay? What you end up having is essentially a very interesting visual map that will allow you to make decisions. Decisions on your workforce. Decisions that are critical if you want to transform, right? So what you're going to do then is you're going to find that on that corner over there, you're going to see people that essentially are, or roles, rather, that are perhaps, they haven't actually been historically important, but you know that those roles are going to actually grow in importance in the next 3 years. So you really need to cultivate those roles. You're going to have people there, from an IT perspective, you're going to have people like data scientists. They were not that important in the past for most organizations, but you know that they are actually growing in importance in the future, right? So with those, actually, you cultivate. You need to cultivate. What is it that you're going to find that talent? How are you going to keep that talent in the future is critical, right? Next one. So you need to think about those roles that you know that today they are critical, but in the future they are going to become even more important. So how do you actually invest in that people so that they stay with you? Because at the end of the day, those roles are not only important to your organization, trust me. Those roles are important to any organization in the industry. So everyone is actually going to be fighting for those people, right? So you need to really invest in that people. Think about your IT strategies, your GRC, your cybersecurity from an IT perspective. At least those roles are massively important in the future. They will become important. They are important today as well. Now, you have that people over there that you know that in the past they were extremely relevant. You know that they are still relevant, but not as relevant in the future, maybe, right? So for that people, maybe your system administrators, right? Maybe that sort of people that due to technologies like cloud, right? Virtualization, all that sort of stuff is actually impacting that people because, at the end of the day, maybe that sort of stuff is matched somewhere else, right? So for that people, you don't want them to actually just simply walk out the door, right? Why? Because that people actually holds the institutional knowledge. So you want to actually, retrain that people. So you can actually rebalance the workforce. Just retrain them so that you can keep them. And finally, of course, you have that classic corner of people that, at the end of the day, we need to face the reality. Maybe they are not that important today. They won't be that important in the future. So you need to think about outsourcing that people. Second, culture. Okay, culture is one of those things that we all know that it is extremely difficult to fix. I'm not going to lie to you, culture is that thing that we all talk about, but at the end of the day, making a change there is massively difficult. Because the organization is used to do things in a particular way, right? We are human beings. We do things in a way, we learn shortcuts, we are accustomed to continue to do things in the same way. And we will. So when it comes to, to essentially fixing all those things, we identify 3 major points that will allow you to make changes or leap changes in your organization. First thing is failure. Second one is sources of innovation. And third one is, of course, recognition and metrics. So when it comes to actually comparing the 2 sets of organizations, digital resistors, traditional organizations, and the ones that are essentially very advanced, they are transformers, right? Those organizations, when you compare them, when it comes to failure, your approach to failure, okay? Essentially, you will see that traditional organizations think about failure as something that is evil. Failure is evil. You don't get your employees, you don't really train your employees to fail. Most organizations don't. You don't go to an organization and they tell you, okay, this is how you should fail. No worries, if you fail, actually your manager is going to come to you and it's going to tell you, bad, don't do it, never again, right? We need to change that. You know, the organizations that are transformers, essentially disrupting the industry, they have a fail-fast mentality. They really embrace failure. Of course, you need to come with certain rules here and there, right? But failure is an important thing. You learn by making mistakes, okay? And then, of course, the next thing is how you source that innovation. We all talk about innovation, right? Everyone is asking us. It's like my manager is constantly asking me, become more innovative. And then I tell my boss, actually, Sandra, what do I do now? Dancing on the stage? Like, can I dance flamenco on the stage? That's definitely going to be innovative, but I'm not sure whether or not you guys will like it, right? So the point is that essentially when it comes to driving innovation, innovation traditionally is defined by leaders, by managers, right? But in transformers, in organizations that are disruptive, essentially that innovation comes from the domain experts, from cross-collaboration, from skunk works, from blue sky type of projects. Those are the sources of innovation today. Just think about Gmail, for example. Gmail from Google actually came from a blue sky type of project. You know what that means? That essentially means a project whereby people, essentially just people from different departments, got together one day and started experimenting out of their own will, as opposed to we as managers telling them, oh, start driving innovation. That's because you allow your employees to actually make mistakes as well. And now finally, recognition and rewards. Those things are connected, right? So essentially, in order to allow your people to become more innovative, you need to reward them accordingly and, essentially recognize them for that. Traditional organizations don't really reward their employees on an ongoing basis. Transformers do. Ongoingly, they reward their employees. And more importantly, when it comes to innovation, when it comes to even productivity, when it comes to transforming, you need to think about what does it mean to actually be productive today? What does it mean? What are the metrics that you need today in the context of digital transformation, right? Those are changing as well. So you need to think about rewarding your employees not only on outputs. For example, you've made a sale today, tick. That's an output, right? You are rewarding an employee for making a sale. Daniel, you've delivered 2 projects today, great. Tick, tick. That's delivering outputs, right? Transformers are essentially rewarding their employees, not on outputs, but on their efficiency, on delivering those outputs. More importantly, am I, as an employee, delivering an output that impacts the entire ecosystem? How is my innovation? Am I actually being innovative today by delivering an output? If I am, essentially those metrics need to be changed. So all those things come together, okay? And finally, technology. And with these, actually, I will conclude today. Okay, so when it comes to technology, and I'm sorry, I just need 2 minutes now to conclude with this. When it comes to technology, right, we were talking about legacy systems. So, and this is a critical thing, and especially today, we are here in a conference that we are talking about technology, right? So I wanted to really touch on this because otherwise, But anyway, so this is a very, very important thing. So when it comes to technology, a lot of us, a lot of organizations like yourselves are faced with a massive problem. Legacy systems, traditional technologies are stopping you from making changes, right? They are really handicapped sometimes. And technology doesn't have to be a handicap. It needs to be a means to actually an end, right? You need to use technology for your own good, not the opposite. When your ERP system actually becomes a problem, that's horrible, right? You are actually spending a lot of money on buying something and then suddenly it becomes hurdle, a problem, something that it takes ages to implement, something that really, a lot of people are finding inefficient and people actually are not using it. So what we did is a survey recently in order to find out what were the top priorities from a technology perspective. What we found in the context, of digital transformation. So what are the top priorities for organizations here in the region, right? What we found is that 3 things are the most important. By the way, this was a very long list. I'm just showing you the top 3. First one, customer-facing applications. We tend to think that customer-facing applications are very, very important in the context of digital transformation, and they are. But what I was interested to find out is that the second most important priority for organizations here in the region was essentially that, back office applications, like ERP, like finance, like payroll, like HR related applications, talent management. All of those do matter. You know why? Because at the end of the day, unless you fix that, unless you fix the back office, you can spend dollars on actually improving the front office, but unless you fix the back office, nothing's going to work, right? So you need to actually address that as well. Now, let's take a look then at what are the priorities if we were to look at ERP in isolation, or systems, applications. And by the way, this again is a survey from the region, looking at all the countries in the region. And by the way, the results for Singapore are literally the same. So, top 5 priorities. Again, this was a list of 15 different priorities. I'm showing you the top 5. Top 5 priorities for ERP applications in the region are essentially better integration, first one. We all know that that's relevant. We all know that that's critical. You want your systems to actually be properly integrated. Otherwise, you don't have the holistic view of your customers. Otherwise, you don't have the holistic view of your employees either, right? You need them to be integrated, not different data silos. Second, scalability. That's also a critical thing to do, right? Ease of use. Look, we need applications that are easy to use so that we, the business as well, can use them. Otherwise, look, if I haven't been trained on using an application, sometimes you feel that you need to do a master to actually use an ERP system and to actually put something on your payroll or whatever. It's horrible, right? So you need that system to be easy to use. And then, of course, you want that system to deliver faster time to value. But what I want you to think about is the importance of this fifth factor, which is essentially the fact that organizations like you are saying that you need a system that is easy to customize. Why? Because you are sick and tired of having to go to IT all the time just in order to make a change in a process. You suddenly have a new supplier, you suddenly have a new customer, and you need to make a massive change in that process. You go to IT, please fix it, do something about this. You want those systems to be easy to customize, right? Okay, so those are the top priorities, and what I'm gonna leave you with is just to say, as you think about all those 5 dimensions that I mentioned earlier, leadership, omni-experience, all of those, think about having a strategy, please. I've seen a lot of companies here in the region saying, okay, yeah, I'm gonna transform, I'm gonna do something about it. What about your strategy? Do you have something in mind? Where are you gonna place your first investment? They don't really have metrics in order to track their progress. So you need to have a strategy for it. Secondly, you need to think about your people. People are critical. You need to find the right talent and keep it, right? So think about that quadrant that I showed you earlier. It's not a magic one, but really helps as well. Think about processes. Do you need to automate a process, or do you need to transform it? Think about those things. And finally, think about data. Have the right data, the right sources, whether or not that data is integrated or not. Look, data is a massive challenge for many organizations, right? But we know that it's critical. And finally, with that, I leave you technology. Find the right technology partner. That's something that is always critical too. So thank you very much for that, for staying here and paying attention to this. Hope you enjoy it. Thank you.